This week in our Advent series, we've been thinking about the concept of the seed that culminates in the nativity story but actually tracks right through the story so far before we get to that point. The problem with the concept of a seed is a seed takes a frustratingly long time to grow. And so the story of the seed starts all the way back in Genesis, right at the collapse of the human story in the beginning, in the garden, at the point of human rebellion, when the whole world looks like it's falling apart. There is this promise that's contained in the concept of the seed. God speaks to the serpent who's kind of instigated this rebellion, and he says this to the serpent in Genesis 3, verse 15. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. So when everything is collapsed and it looks like there's no way forward, there's a promise in the concept of the seed of the woman who will come and will not be mastered by the serpent, not be under the serpent and under sin like the original humans were, but in fact will master the serpent, will be over serpent and the sin. Now, imagine how Eve must have felt when all of a sudden there's a seed growing in her womb. She gives birth to a seed, her offspring, Cain, and in fact not just one seed, two, Cain and Abel, two boys. Is this the moment where the promise is going to be realised, where the seed of the woman will master sin and the serpent? Unfortunately, that's not the way that it pans out. If you've read the story of Cain and Abel in Genesis chapter 4, you're going to find two brothers at war. Cain gets really angry with Abel, probably unnecessarily. And there's this moment where he's tempted to subvert the plans and the purposes and the ways of God. He's about to act in a way that's not befitting of the seed of the woman who's carrying this promise of mastery over the serpent. He's about to lash out in anger, and at that moment, God intervenes with some divine instruction. He says this to Cain in Genesis chapter 4, verse 7. If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at the door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. You must master it. That's what the seed of the woman is meant to do. But that is not what Cain does. Cain gives in to his anger, gives in to his flesh, and instead of listening to God, murders his brother. And there must have been an echo in Eve's heart that day. Did God really say? You said that my seed would crush the serpent's head, that my seed would master sin, and yet here we are in this moment in the story where that doesn't seem to be the reality. And unfortunately, things get worse before they get better. This text then echoes one generation, gives way to another, one seed of a woman after another, after another, after another, and none of them seem capable of mastering sin and the serpent. Did God really say, should we give up on the promise? But just as the Old Testament is about to close out, there is a whisper of the promise hidden in the prophet Micah. This is what it reads in Micah 5, verse 2. But you, Bethlehem, Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be the ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times. The whisper of a promise of one who's coming to rule. But the interesting thing is that it says this one will come out of Bethlehem Ephrathah. Of course, that's a location piece. The one going to be born will be born in Bethlehem Ephrathah. But there's also another hidden message underneath. Because the term Ephrathah, the word Ephrathah in the Hebrew, actually means Israelite woman. God hasn't forgotten his promise, and he hasn't changed his mind, and the plan still exists despite the fact that it's been contested over all of these years. The seed is still going to come out of Ephrathah, out of the woman, out of the Israelite woman. And so as the New Testament opens and we begin to see the nativity unfold, it says this of Mary, a woman carrying a seed, in Luke chapter 2, verse 6. While they were there in Bethlehem, the time came for the baby to be born, and she, the Israelite woman, gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them. In verse 10, the angel makes this pronouncement about this child. Do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Today, in the town of David, a Saviour has been born. He is the Messiah, the Lord. The anticipated seed has finally come, and it came exactly the way the Lord said it would at the very start of the story. It was the seed that came out of the woman. That plan had not changed. And I suppose it's a reminder to all of us today that when God makes a promise to us, that promise is like a seed. It's going to take some time, and it's going to require some patience, and there's going to be resistance and opposition to that story, to that seed, to that promise, time after time after time. If we don't understand that, we will be tempted to lay down the seed of promise, to forget about it, to question it. Did God really say? Instead of anticipating and expecting that a seed takes time to grow and it encounters resistance along the way. So if you're at a moment in your story today where the promise that God has given you is requiring patience for you to hold on to, or you're experiencing some resistance or some opposition to that, don't be tempted to question and say, did God really say? Instead, realize this is what it looks like to carry a seed. Hold on to the seed. Do not let it go.